Okay, I think we'll get started. I want to welcome you all here today to our first Lunch and Learn of this particular semester. My name is Linda Snetzelaar, and I am the associate. Can't hear me? Is that better? Okay. My name is Linda Snetzelaar, and I am the Associate Provost of Outreach and Engagement. And what we do with Lunch and Learns is bring a variety of faculty, staff, and often students to present various things that are going on our campus. And we do this in both Des Moines and also Iowa City. And if you're wondering about what our schedule will look like in upcoming months, we do have a website that you can go to, and so please feel free to come to all of our events. We're very happy today to have with us Anita Jung. She is from the School of Art and Art History, and her artwork sort of explores the bittersweet celebration of every day. And then in addition to that, she looks at things that are very special within our ordinary lives in terms of the work that she does. She received her bachelor's degree from Arizona State University and her master's in fine arts from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She has several years of experience teaching printmaking, drawing, and installation courses. Her work is represented in numerous public art collections and has been exhibited extensively throughout the United States and abroad in juried, invitational, and solo exhibitions. Anita has been involved with professional print organizations such as Mid-America Print Council, and she has also been involved with the Southern Graphics Council International and was actually a former president and honorary council member with that group. She's participated in international print conferences in Poland and Germany, Estonia, and England, and currently is doing quite a lot in India and has been since about 2006. One of her latest projects is something that I've had the pleasure of observing in the New Hampshire building, and she'll be telling you more about that. But it's a wonderful project that involved seventh grade students throughout Iowa, so she'll be telling you more about that. And please make welcome Anita Jung.
Okay, I'm on. I'm live. Okay, I'm good. All right. So I want to thank Linda because she's always very gracious and generous and invites me to do a lot. So thank you. And I also want to thank Jade, who is her wonderful assistant, who has miraculously organized me. So this is all due to her. And I'm going to kind of sneak back here so I know my slides. So I'm going to start a little bit by telling you about printmaking. A lot of people don't know what it is, and this is a wonderful video. It's on the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art's website, and it's something that we show our students when they're incoming in the introductory courses, and it's an interactive video that's really fun because you can go through and you can start it and then you can kind of play with it. And so it sort of tells you what printmaking is, the traditions and what we do. So let me keep going here. I'll just do one because it's really fun. We like these a lot. So this is in a nutshell what litho is. Here we go. This is what I'm teaching this semester. See how easy it is? You just do this. And we roll it up. And this is so fun. Let me see. It's that easy. Look. Voila, a print. So let me hit escape. This is where I might get into trouble. exit? Oh, just hit the red thing? Okay. All right. So that's sort of what printmaking is. And a lot of times what it is, I'm sorry, I'm going to be like messing up here. Okay. What it is very, those are sort of the traditions of it. But the medium has evolved and changed. And so this too is a print. And this is Terry Conrad, who was our fabulous Grant Wood Fellow last year, and I miss him terribly. That's like the dilemma of these Grant Wood Fellows, is they leave. I'm like, stay. Anyhow, so what he does with his printmaking work is he makes presses that make these amazing prints. And it's almost like the prints become the residue of the press. So, and all of this comes, it's really dealing with the ideas and the theory of a print, as opposed to the traditional methods of making a print with intaglio, woodcut, silkscreen, and lithography. And then this is Neil Rock. He's also was a Grant Wood Fellow from 2015, or last year, and he's actually teaching with us again this year, so we were able to keep him an extra year. But I would also make the case that this too is a print, although he self-identifies as a painter. And the reason is he silk screens silica onto these forms and then casts them. So it's very much about a print. A print is really just the ability to reproduce something in a series or multiple times, although you don't have to reproduce it multiple times. You can just do one. And so I think Neil does that. And then this is Alexandria Smith, and she was our Virginia A. Myers visiting assistant professor last year. Printmaking has been having 2 visitors every year. She also identifies as a painter, but these labels don't really make a lot of sense anymore. And more, the discipline is just becoming art. The disciplines are no longer printmaking, painting, drawing. It's really much more of an expanded field. And so for her work, I would make the case that and I did, so I could hire for printmaking, that her work is very invested in print, just even being a collage-like medium. Collage, layers, those are all inherently very printmaking-like. And also she deals with print matter. So she has found prints, wallpaper, contact paper, different things that have been printed through industrial printing methods. And this is some of my earlier work. This is about 10 years old. And I became very interested, as I think so many printmakers do, in the matrix in terms of what a print is pulled from. The thing of a print that most people never see. So it was the plates. And I was working on a lot of steel, and I began to cut them with plasma cutters. And I was very interested in, as Linda said, sort of these everyday things. And so this was a small stencil that I brought from Joanne Fabric, and really kind of examining domesticity, but also that overwhelming aspect of domesticity. And this series really started just, it's not evident in the work, but it really started once I became a mom. And part of that was because I didn't know what to do with a baby. And so it's like, I was kind of scared because they let me go home with her, and that just seemed wrong. But so I didn't know what to do, and so I was living in this little town, and it had this little mall, and it's like, where do you go? What do you do? And so we would go there, and I would go into this Joanne Fabric, and I just became. And there's like a Joanne Fabrics, and a paint store, and a J.C. Penney's, and this was the mall in this town, and so. It's like a little corridor, and so I would take her, there, just something to get out of the house, and. I just really became interested in sort of the idea of the paint store and the Joanne Fabric next to each other, and what designated sort of that more, kind of masculine painting, house painting, and then the feminine, fabric painting or whatever. And so I became interested in that, and so I started to do these decals, and I really think it was sort of a sense of being somewhat overwhelmed with my new role. And then as a part of that, I became interested just through cutting that with a plasma cutter with the shapes that fell out. And so to me, that really talks about the print, sort of a positive, negative form. But I also started to use that, too, as a floor piece. And then one of the challenges I was giving myself was, what next? What can I do with this? Where can I push it? So I started to build walls. And so these are really heavy pieces because they're constructed just as you would construct a wall. And then they're completely carved into to embed this decorative element into that wall. And then I cut it out of a mirror, which I never recommend doing because it's really hard and it can be painful. But I did this piece, and then there's this beading on this camouflage fabric, and it says, "You can't see me." And so it's about that invisibility. And for me, that was also, sort of a biographical aspect because just raising a daughter and how daughters can sort of trying to make sure that she's going to be visible in the world and strong and confident, and then the mirrors of course are reflecting. So my work is very approachable. I think it's a lot of to understand it. If you just sort of start to name what you see, you get at the content very easily. This is actually parts of an installation. This is a larger piece, but you can see that those flowers are all cut out of paint chips. And again, that came from that paint store. So I started to take paint chips from the store, and my daughter she learned at a young age to just start grabbing paint chips. So, and there's kind of a funny story. But I'll get to that later. I'll tell you that anyway. This is a spray paint wall piece. Again, it's that same swag kind of pattern. And this was from looking at children's clothes. And so they would have, this is called Target Girl, and it was a skirt in Target that was camouflage but with pink. And I just really thought about that, like how interesting that was and also kind of scary. This like, oh, now it's a girl Target. Anyway. And then this is the print that came from that. And my intention was not to ever print these in the traditional sense, but I had this graduate student, Lee Marshallonis, who actually eventually came here and got her certificate in the Center for the Book. And she's a wonderful artist. She lives in Detroit now, but she said she wanted to see these printed. And so she said she was going to help me print them. And so that I had to print them, and so I did. Now Lee also was the one who accused me of stealing paint chips. And I said, I'm not stealing them, they're free. And she said, 3 or 4 are free if you're going to paint your house. But when you start taking them all, that's stealing. And so as a result of that, I did a lot of research, and I found out that the paint company at Lowe's, they have all those different brands. Well, it's just one paint company, and it's in Wheaton, Illinois. And I called them, and I had to call several times, and eventually I got a person who was very nice, and I said, would you donate some paint chips for my research? I'm an artist, I work at this university. And they said, fine. And they said, well, how many do you want? And I said, well, what can you give me? And she said, well, whatever you want. Like, what do you want? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm like, oh, I'll take 6. And I thought she meant boxes. And then I got a phone call from the secretary saying that there's a 13,000-pound delivery. And what did I order? and I said, I didn't order anything. I had no idea what it was. It was 6 skids of paint chips. So it was a little, beware of what you wish for. It was a little overwhelming. And so for a while that became a major art movement at the University of Tennessee. That everyone was using paint chips. So, this is a piece that was done in Des Moines, and again, it's a spray paint piece, and actually keeping that stencil up as part of the piece. So the stencil would be flipped to spray paint the one side, and then flipped back and spray painted to do the other side. And I deal a lot with binaries. I do deal a lot with positives, negatives, and that's something that I'm very interested in. And then I also started to use these because they were steel. There's a tradition in printmaking where you smoke a plate. And so that's a really wonderful method of printing, and it just really fills in any pinholes that you might have in etching, so it's for intaglio. And so I just began to smoke the paper. And this was a really fun thing. My daughter used to be my spotter because you can literally burn your work up or it'll blow up in your face. So yeah, I lit a lot of pieces on fire, but that was also a different way of printing and exploring the print. I've also done a lot of shadow pieces, and the shadow is something I'm also very interested in as a print. As a print, in every day, as we walk, we cast a shadow, and to me, that becomes it meets the definition of a fine art print. This is a piece that was about Katrina, and so this is older work. It's 2005, and I was invited to do a piece in Argentina, and that was in October. And the Katrina had hit in 2000 or in September, and I was really devastated. I had lived in Louisiana a number of years, and so it was very personal. And so I did this piece with cut aluminum vinyl, and that's the houses. And these are very upscale houses from Atlanta, from the newspaper. I just happened to have it. And I paired those with a timeline of everything that happened, the 10 days of Katrina, from the day that Katrina first made landfall in Florida and 11 people died. And then it went back out into the Gulf, and then it came back and it hit New Orleans. And then, so this went through until people finally were evacuated from the Superdome, or I forget what it's called. So anyway, so it's very kind of didactic language, very, just time information each day. And they're paralleled with the story of Hansel and Gretel. And so I found this book from the 40s with all these pictures, and I had those cut out from a piece of plexiglass and then cast those shadows onto these homes and onto this information, because the story of Hansel and Gretel is a story of repeated betrayal by people that should have been helping these children, be it the father, the stepmother, the witch. So it's also a story with a lot of death metaphor when Hansel takes the swan across the lake, and all these different metaphors within that story. And it worked out really well. It was strange doing this in Argentina, but George Bush was in Argentina at the time. I invited him to the opening, and he didn't come. So I've always held that against him. And then here's another piece, and this is really examining what's a painting and what's a piece of art. And these are just paint strips hanging from a ceiling. And the thing that I really loved about it was seeing people in it. And I should have brought one of those slides, but I didn't. But, sort of what is a piece of art and how do people enter into it? And so in this piece, people actually were in the art, and these were very long strips. And this is one of the things that I used to do with my daughter, and this is sort of the, how to work when you're not working strategies. And I would make these long strips of paint chips, and with all these different systems of ways of organizing them. And then this piece was hung, this is in this is actually in Jackson, Mississippi, in a wonderful gallery that has this strange kind of hook system on the ceiling that I was able to use. And then this is beginning to be a lot of collaborative work. So while I'm doing all this work, I also have a practice of collaboration. And this is a piece from Estonia, from Tallinn. And I went there and I had proposed doing a piece that would be done all on site. And that was also a strategy that I had used a lot in my work, where I would arrive at a gallery, basically go and rent a truck from Lowe's, bring a bunch of drywall, cut a bunch of drywall, mount it on the walls, and use the gallery almost as a studio. And so this was made in 5 days, and it was quite an elaborate piece with a really wonderful group of people, students and professional artists. And so it was myself, and there were 2 people from Spain, a woman from China, 3 Estonians, a woman from Germany, a woman from Cuba. And so it was very, in varying degrees of language. But because art is a language, we were really able to communicate. And so there's, how to make a piece without a single author. And that's something I'm also really interested in, is that. And so this was, and they came up with the theme, and it was called Rabbit Saves the World. And so there was this whole story. Oh, and then there was also a woman, she's a dying Navajo. So that also I felt really enriched, because of the idea of storytelling in her cultural history. And so we just sort of made these stories. Those are Russian books that the students were sort of talking about, the Estonian students talking about sort of the Russian occupation. And then we had rabbits sort of going through all these perils and adventures. And the prints, some of the prints were quite beautiful. And then on the floor is sort of this map of a city just with tape. And it was a great way to just connect things. And it was really fun. And the funny thing about it was, I just went in and did this because I've been doing this with students at different schools and different places. And, my students are very used to me. And so, I just went in and started talking to these students and said, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And so at the opening, they were so excited, but they told me that they thought I was crazy. When they said, we thought you were insane. And I was like, no, it worked. And they're like, and they said, they had never seen this gallery. This was a very, I didn't know this, but, framed work, matted framed, hung on the wall kind of space. And I came without even knowing it and sort of broke a lot of rules. But I didn't know the rules, so I didn't do it on purpose. And then this is a build-up of, this is the second step of the Rabbit Saves the World series. And this is in Bristol in England. And for this piece, I just put out a call for artists to send me things. And so artists would send me just even a small thing, like if on the bottom here, right here, this is a print of a dead mouse that an artist found. And she just sent me one, and then I duplicate it. So a lot of this is actually inkjet printing on rice paper. And the theme of the conference was Old World, New World. And they were sort of taking that as a larger, not only England, but also in a larger context of printmaking, the old traditions and the new traditions. And so I took it, obviously as an American, but people would send me very small things through the mail, and then I would make them large, or I'd make them very multiple. And so I also did this sort of the old world and then the new world sort of division between the spaces. And it was really fun because then people would come and they would find their little elements and things like that. And the school was really nice. They liked the piece a lot, and they asked if they could keep it up, and I said fine. And then they were concerned about returning the work to me, and but I found out they had a book arts class, and so they retained all that material to be able to do into bookworks, because I very seldom do things twice, which is ironic for a printmaker. This is another kind of a performance-esque piece. This piece, for 2 years, I maintained a virtual farm. You guys have all heard about Farmville, right? So for 2 years, I had a farm. And the first year, I turned it into a virtual artist residency, so not unlike the Grantwood Colony. And so I would invite artists. And, I had this very elaborate, like what was in these buildings, that there was this elaborate studio and this wonderful, B&B. And, and of course it's just Facebook Farmville. But I would award residencies to artists. So it was sort of the virtual residency when you have virtually no time. And so when people would be very, very busy, I would award them a virtual residency so they could make art. And so here, then I also had rules about, I only farmed with other artists. And so there were other artists that all had these farms, and we were farming together, and I was running this residency. And so then we did a portfolio exchange, which is a wonderful tradition. It's actually become a very large tradition within printmaking for professional printmakers to do these exchanges. And so what you do is you find 20 artists, and you ask them if they want to be in an exchange, and then you each print 20 prints, and so you sort of do a trade. And they're usually thematic. There's usually a reason for them. And so this was, of course, Farmville. And, it's a farm one. And so each artist printed a print, and then I digitally printed out a picture of their farm, which is sideways, and then their print that they made for the portfolio is also printed out. And then I got these are called woodies, from Ben Franklin's and different places that come in all these shapes. And so people could ink those up and then add those to the farms. as they wanted. That's me. But that was the entryway into the piece. And then I'm not a performer. It's really hard even for me to talk, like in a talk. It's not something I do a lot. I'm not a lecturer. I'm not a professor that does that. So performing is also kind of like a thing I don't like to do, but every now and then you sort of have to do something. And so I was invited to be in a 10-year anniversary of 9/11. And so what I did was I Xeroxed all the names of all the people who died on 9/11. And then I put them in stacks for the two World Trade buildings, each of the buildings, each of the planes. And in the drawer was a name of a hijacker. And so I did this piece. It was sort of an endurance piece because I did it for 19 consecutive hours, which is really weird because it wasn't that hard. At a certain point, you really are in a trance. What was hard was when I got up and had to like go back into the world. That was really difficult. But so I just folded these planes, and then every hour a bell would go off, and I'd open that drawer and I'd fold a plane. And for me, it was just, it was a symbol of everyone being victims. And it's called The Bluest Sky because that is probably my greatest memory, was how blue that sky was. And then this is Liz Lerman, and I love Hancher very, very much. And I really feel bad that I moved here 10 years ago, so I really only experienced 2 years of Hancher. And my daughter grew up without Hancher, which I think, we still did things, but, we had to go places to do them, other places. And so, she grew up with Hancher, but not the same Hancher that she would have experienced. And this is a woodcut class that I taught, and Liz Lerman came in, and she was doing a pop-up museum, and she did this piece that was highly collaborative with the dance department, and it was about the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and also sort of honoring the role of nurses. And she's a really wonderful, wonderful person, very generous. And so she came and she talked to the students and talked to them about how to look at art and how to critique art and how to think of, how to be an artist in the world. And those are conversations I'm very, very interested in. And so we made these long banners, and there's like 9 of them. And they hung over the south entrance of the library, which they were so nice to let me hang from these banisters and over these, it kind of created tents in the other area. But then a lot of, there were several performances. This was called a pop-up museum. And so there are all these different things going on in the library, which I also really love, that relationship of the library and a museum. And it's something that Kathy Edwards and Sean O'Hara speak to me a lot about, the idea of the University of Iowa Museum of Art as a library, and now it's actually going to be connected to the library, which is very exciting because their view was, it was here for the students and, part of what you're supposed to do. So the dancers worked with these, and as well as some theater people. So they were Velcroed, so they were very easy to pull down, and because we knew they were going to do that. It wasn't like they just came and did that. They asked about that, and I loved that other layer. And so several times they visited the class, and so it was very collaborative and very, very fun. This is a Just Seeds project, and this was for the Climate March. And Just Seeds is a collective. A lot of printmaking outside of the university is done with collectives, in part because we need a lot of big machines and it's very, very expensive. And so people come together and form collectives. And so Just Seeds is a very famous political one. And so they were doing these posters, and anyone could be a representative, and they would send you these posters, and then all you had to do was photograph them. And so this is actually Breanne Trammell, who was another Virginia Myers visiting professor. Her silkscreen class and then a bunch of other people, whoever wanted to, went, and George's let us put a whole bunch of these up on their wall. And some of them might still be there, and then a few other places around town. But we got permission, but we do talk about some of that, like, art as intervention, which some people might call vandalism, but we don't call it that. And so then India is a big part of my life. And I never really sought to go there. I just had a student from India who decided I needed to go there. And for some reason, my life seems to be a series of accidents, or students deciding things that I needed to do. So I organized a student trip, and then I moved here. That was in Tennessee, and then I moved here and I found out about the winter program. And so I've been organizing trips ever since. And the thing that I love about taking students to India, there's so many things I love about taking students to India, but I really love them to be a visual minority, and that's a big thing. And to really talk about the problems in the art and how embedded the art and the traditions are. This is a group that went 2 years ago, and we painted this mural at the Barefoot College, which some of you may have heard of Solar Mamas. It's a film. It's a really great film. It's on Netflix. And Bunker Roy, who has a TED Talk, is the founder. And he was a follower of Gandhi. And so what he does is he empowers basically middle-aged women that they refer to as grandmothers. Really? But okay. And they actually train and teach them. And it's all about trying to keep the villages intact, because one of the things that you quickly figure out about India is the importance of family. And when somebody is separate from that, they really do not have a support system. And so keeping the villages intact is really important, because people go to the cities and the slums just keep growing and growing and growing. And if they're in the village, they can have a better quality of life. And so they train these women, and they train women because men leave. Men will leave the village. They will take their newfound skills and go try to make money for their family, but a lot of times then they just stop sending money to the families, so it's a problem. So the students designed and did this mural, and it's right across from where the women who are learning about making solar cookers will walk out of, and so it's sort of an homage to them. And they collaborated, and they had a week to talk about this and figure it out. So they did a great job. And this is work that I did, a lot of this work during the flood, and I want to show this because it relates to Hancher. And I better hurry up. But it relates to the Hancher piece. And what I was doing was I was looking at floodplain maps, and then I was printing over them. And you can kind of see it's sort of this eclectic kind of India coming in and the flood. So I was sort of trying to process the flood, because I was in one of the displaced buildings. And so we were at Menards, 3.5 miles off campus, which was an amazing hardship for students, more so than anyone. To have to do the CAM bus as an art student, you schlep enough, but having to add that was a lot more. So this was a large series of work that I did about floods and floodplains, and also in India, rivers are very sacred. So, and then this is a later body of work that I started doing, and I'm still involved in this, but it's going to change because I changed buildings. And this work is about making and being in a building with makers, and never, a lot of times all you see is the residue, or you don't really know what was made with something. And I'm very involved with the laser cutters and the computerized routers and different tools. And so I would take the detritus, like the garbage that was meant to be thrown out, and make prints from that. And I was also recycling. I would have students sort of save their ink that they were, after they had finished printing, they'd have leftover ink. And so I was using that. And it was really just sort of about trying to think about, being a maker and lessening the footprint, but also being in a building with other makers, which is really interesting, because it's just so much is always going on in an art building that it's really exciting, but half the time you see nothing. Like, you see such a small part of it. And this was really fun, because a lot of people, when they would see the work, would be like, hey, that's my students, or oh, that's mine. And I'd be like, what'd you make? And so that was really fun. But you can also see the relationship with some of this work to the jali, which are the windows, the stone carved windows that they have in India. And then this takes us to Hancher. And so about 2 years ago, Sean O'Hara came up to me in the hall. We were like walking the hall. He said, hey, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And he said, would you be insulted if we asked you to work with students, or asked you to work with kids? And I was like, no. like, would somebody be insulted for that? And he's like, yeah, sometimes people are. I was like, oh, okay. So I was happy to do it, and it was really interesting because I've never done commissioned work. It's more like I, make something and people choose to buy it or they don't, or I propose an exhibition and it's a temporary thing. So I had to make sort of like a maquette and a proposal, which I was just like, ugh. And it was really scary, but I did it. And I came up with an idea of, I was really trying to come up with a question, something to make the students that I would be working with think. And I met with Chuck Swanson and just immediately fell in love. He's the director of Hancher, and he's just one of the kindest, nicest people you'll ever meet. He just so cares about people, and he really wanted to do something about the state of Iowa and about the audiences. And so he wanted to work with younger children, and he wanted to go to 5 cities, and so we collaborated. And I kind of talked him into going to junior high. And junior high I really appreciate junior high because it's when most people stop making art. They self-select and they decide they're good at something or they're not good at something. And so a lot of people decide that they can't make art in junior high. So I wanted an opportunity to interact with that. Also, a lot of people do things in grade schools and high schools, and so I think junior high gets a little bit forgotten. And I really like junior high students because they're still sweet, but they're kind of edgy. So we came up with the word, just a question, and that was performance. And so what does that mean? What does it mean to perform? What does that mean when you talk about a place like Hancher? But what does that mean in your everyday life? I am performing right now. You perform in a class. You perform constantly. We're constantly performing. We're performing our lives. And so we did what I called mind maps, but they corrected me. These are constellation maps. And so we started with the word performance and just gravitated out of there. And it was really an opportunity for them to interact and to engage and to have fun. And then, this will be kind of a blurry slide, we did selfies. Some of the kids, they just preferred to have somebody else take the photograph, but they really cared about it. And, sometimes they'd come back and say, I redid my selfie because it just wasn't good enough. And that was the other thing, was I felt like junior high students would really get the idea of the selfie. And I used to be an artist in the schools in Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana. And so one of the things that I was charged with when I was doing that work was to intermix the curriculum with art. So writing, reading, history, all these things. So all the projects that I would plan for the classes were in some way supporting other courses. And that was a really great experience because I would always have teachers come up to me and say, that student, I've never seen them sit this long, ever. And then, the good students would be so frustrated and upset because there were no answers. It was very ambiguous. So the selfies, I thought that I wasn't sure if that was still cool in high school, but I figured it was in junior high. And then I became really concerned because I knew I was not going to be able to use every piece by every child because Hancher wasn't going to let me do the whole building. I don't know why. They could have, but they weren't doing that. And so I came up with measuring each of the students, and they would get they would do their picture, their selfie or whatever, and then I would measure their height on a piece of rice paper, and then they would choose the color, and then they would write their names, and then I would thank them for participating, and I would thank them by their name, which really, to me became really an important thing when you're asking people to trust you with their art. So that was really great. And this is Rachel Arnone, who is married to one of our cellists here, and she's one of the most amazing art teachers. And she really helped sort of, I came up with the idea of the selfie and the micrographic writing about the word performance, and that's how they do the drawings, is they write these words. But she really helped sort of that implementation, and she really helped with our, we used Southeast here in Iowa City as our pilot program, and so she really helped sort of solidify the program and help us to really reach our target audience. And so she was doing these light tables, these old light tables, and so that they could lightly trace their images. So what we would do is they'd take the selfie, we'd print out a Xerox, they would lightly trace that Xerox, and then they would write their words. And I was fairly amazed at how well this worked, which I probably shouldn't confess, but I was sort of like, I was kind of prepared for anything and everything. But the students really got involved in it. They really enjoyed it. And the schools varied tremendously. So with some schools, like Storm Lake, had us just work with a small group of students. And then Spencer had 7th and 8th grade do it. Although I only did it with the 7th graders, but they did it with their whole school then. And the students really had fun, and they really engaged with one another. I mean, it did everything that I wanted it to do. And then I'm going to show you this video, if I can figure it out. Yeah. This was made by Zoe Woodworth, and so after we went to Southeast, we were able to make this video.
At the University of Iowa is a place where great artists share their work with great audiences. We want you to be our next great artist. We're inviting 7th graders from 7 Iowa communities to help Anita Young, an artist who teaches at the University of Iowa, create a new work that will be permanently displayed at the new Hanscher Auditorium. The auditorium is currently under construction on the University of Iowa campus in Iowa City. The 7 communities are Algona, Council Bluffs, Iowa City, Maquoketa, Muscatine, Spencer, and Storm Lake. We'll tell you more about the project in just a minute. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about Hanscher. Hanscher has been connecting artists and audiences since 1972. Many wonderful performances have happened on the Hanscher stage over the years. In 2008, the original Hanscher Auditorium was destroyed by flooding. But that didn't slow us down. We continued to present artists in Iowa City and all across the state of Iowa, in your community, and many, many others. In 2016, a brand new Hanscher Auditorium will open. That's where your art will be on display. Here's how the project works. First, you'll take a selfie. That's right, it won't just be your art. You'll actually be part of the project. Once you have your selfie, you'll trace it onto a sheet of paper. Then you'll write a short description of what performance means to you. Once you've written it, you'll write those words on the lines of your outlined selfie. Don't worry, your art teacher will help you if you have any questions. Once your artwork is done, your art teacher will send it to Anita Young. She'll select many of the student works to be part of the piece of art that will hang in the new Hanscher Auditorium. Pretty cool, huh? Before we go, here are a few amazing facts about Hanscher and the new auditorium. The new Hanscher Auditorium will have about 1,800 seats. That's a lot, but Hanscher is committed to connecting with many, many more people all across the state of Iowa. The new building includes 10 million pounds of structural steel to form the skeleton of the building and hold it up. The new building also includes 80 million pounds of concrete. That's enough to fill an entire football field at the depth of 10 feet. You might be wondering why we think the arts are so important, that we're building a huge new building for them. Well, we believe that the arts make life better. They help us explore our own creativity, solve problems, and come together as a community. And, of course, the arts are fun, just like this project. Everyone at Hanscher is excited to see what performance means to you. And we can't wait to share your art with everyone who comes to the new Hanscher Auditorium. We hope you and your family will come to Hanscher to see your art and a show when the new auditorium opens. And who knows, maybe in a few years, you'll be a student at the University of Iowa. When you come to Hanscher Auditorium with your friends, you'll be able to show them your art and remember how you contributed to an amazing new place for artists and audiences. We look forward to seeing your art and seeing you at Hanscher Auditorium.
So I think Zoe just did an amazing job with that piece. And so we would be able to show that to the students at the other schools. And these are the teachers, and they were just so welcoming and so supportive of the project. And one of the other things that I really love about Hancher is that it doesn't just go to places once. It really, one of the things that Chuck is passionate about is building relationships. And so he says, you know, you have to go multiple times. You have to, you know, relationships are formed. And so he really does go out of his way, if you know it or not, to go and bring a lot of things across the state. And so these teachers were all very wonderful and very welcoming. And then they did he went with, I can't remember Kevin's last name, but he went with a performer to revisit all of the cities that we had gone to. And they had a contest to name the piece. And so they named it We All Perform, or that was eventually the name that was selected, which was great, I think. And sometimes you don't know if you're on the right track or not, and then something, you know, serendipity happens. And what was so amazing was this woman, her father died building the first Hancher, and we met her at Southeast. And you know, this picture is after many tears. Everyone was just like, "Oh!" So, but she was a teacher's aide, and you know, we're just doing this project, and all of a sudden, you know, she's just sort of sitting there talking to me, and she divulges that, and it's just like, wow, how did that happen? So, so that's her. And so this is just sort of the making of the piece. It's on panels, it's on wood, and I started with maps, silk screening maps, and slowly building them and kind of working them all at the same time, more or less. And then on top of the maps, once I got done painting the maps, I made some stencils of the Hancher building, because again, I wanted Hancher, this idea of inside outside, of bringing people to Hancher, of Hancher going to people. And so that's actually the blueprints of Hancher cut out and stenciled on there. And then the faces of the children are added, and it's pretty colorful. Everyone's like, it's really colorful. Yeah. So and so then this is the finished piece, and so it reads from Council Bluff to Muscatine. And oops, wait, where did we go? You warned me about that. Anyhow, so that is the end, and then this is some of my more recent work. So if anyone has any questions, we have time for answers. I'll make up answers. So I'll try to find them out. I can Google really quick. So, any questions? I covered it all. Well, sometimes, you know, I'm asked a lot about, a lot of times, you know, using these commercial things, and if the work, you know, sometimes people will be like, well, you know, how do you feel about cliche and things like that? Because that's also something I really enjoy. I really think that when you're dealing with that, you're kind of entering into a understood truth, and so that's a really great way to interrupt it. So flowers and all these sort of tropes that sometimes artists kind of frown upon, I kind of embrace. So yeah, I do all that.
I do have one question
Okay.
for you. You create these original images, but you work a lot with found images, pencils. What is the significance of that for you? In a way, I guess it could be called appropriation, maybe a little bit to some extent, and also just found works, found images. What is the importance of that process?
A lot of that it's kind of an involved answer, but some of that has to do with ego and and wanting to sort of work with the world around you, rather than just always being the maker. And so that idea of eclecticism and sort of interacting in the world around you, and also just not really having to reinvent. There's so much out there that the remix is something I think that's really an important kind of art form. Uh-huh.
Some of those, the ones that we were showing early from the Grant Wood scholars, were three-dimensional.
Yes.
The one was kind of round, and the one was a whole big structure. So printmaking, is that sort of new? That, I mean, you think of a print as just a flat print, but you can go into three dimension.
Definitely, and Klaus Oldenburg, who's a sculptor, he's really known for his soft sculpture work, and he also does a lot of public art. So like there's a baseball bat in front of the post office in Chicago, and different, like a very large sculpture of a spoon with a cherry. I think that's in St. Louis. I'm not sure. Minneapolis. Oh, yeah. Well, so he actually made a lot of prints that then could be constructed, cut out and constructed, which was an amazing strategy because a lot of collectors bought two prints, one to cut out and structure and then one to keep flat. So it's a good idea. So I think artists have been working with that forever, and of course Fred Grooms is a wonderful example too, and even Robert Rauschenberg too. And so what I think now is happening, and I think it's just such a great time to be in the arts, is that there is it's sort of a post-structuralist, and pluralism is totally invited, and we're kind of divided into areas only because of academia and then also the commercial aspect. But artists are definitely crossing all those boundaries because, it's not like lithography is a discipline anymore. It's a tool. It's a series of techniques. And if that is the voice you want and you need for a piece, that's the tool you should use. And so I think that's where people are at, artists. Uh-huh.
Do you keep a relationship with Lansky?
Mauricio died a couple years ago, but I really like the family a lot.
But since they're teachers too.
With, you mean like Tomas or with? Oh, well, I have taken students to visit Tomas's studio, which is quite impressive. It's like, the dream studio when I grow up someday, maybe. I don't think so. Uh-huh.
With all the different medias and everything else, and I'm just being a little facetious, does anybody still use pencil and paper?
Everybody uses pencil and paper, and it is a technological tool, just like a computer. And almost every student is taught to draw basic drawing, and it's actually been found really important. And I'm really sad that they're no longer teaching cursive in the schools, because I think that is a really, really important drawing. And that's what I used to always say to people. And for some reason, people will take a drawing class and then tell you they don't know how to draw. But, and then I always say, well, do you know how to print? Yes. Do you know how to write cursive? Yes. And I'm like, those are two very sophisticated forms of drawing. Everyone draws, so.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anyone else? Yes?
Talk about sort of the upside of the flexibility of disciplines or techniques, but I'm wondering, institutions, I know there's a lot of nostalgia for the disciplines, especially in the more directly hand, the print and ceramics and things, and also, there's a lot of pressure to cut departments to start looking at cut, and I wonder, you start to see everything sort of merged into design and more towards commercial design. I wonder, in some ways, by identifying anything goes or whatever works. Does it also play into some sense in which do we need a separate faculty for each of these disciplines?
Well, I think, there's a couple different questions there, and one question about sort of the disciplines. People need to know the disciplines. They need to be fluid. You have to learn the tool before you can cross it over. And so we do still teach, the technical-based courses. But then when we get into advanced, we start to encourage them, and we start to discuss, would that be better as a silk screen? Is that better as a etching? Would that be better as a silk screen with etching? And so, posing those questions, I think, are important rather than being a purist. If a pure medium is what will best support the artist's idea and intention, then certainly that's what they should do. So we would never deter them from doing that. But it used to be when I was being trained, and I was sort of an anomaly, people were like, you were either a lithographer or an etcher. And I just was like, both. I was like, well, I want to, actually I was a painting major, my undergrad, and so I didn't have to follow the rules, because it was like, oh yeah, she's a painting major. let her do what she wants. So I kind of got away with that. And then when I went to graduate school, I had already been doing that. And so I just continued. So that's one question. And then your second question was, can you?
I just know there's a lot of pressure, especially on the arts, in terms of staffing and faculty, and
Oh, yeah.
a little bit as we kind of merge everything into some quasi-design kind of
Well-
major that, I mean, that there's institutionally that's tough to sort of, how many faculty are we going to have in that?
Well, I think it's super important to have multiple faculty because they will teach you differently, and everyone has different ways of doing things. And I have taken, one of the things that really benefited me and really helped me break down boundaries was that I had the opportunity to study with amazing people in my field, multiple people. I actually have studied with a lot of different people, and every single one has taught me so much that I can utilize, and that in turn has helped me so much as an instructor, because if a student is blocked by how I'm giving them information, I can try a different tact. And so I would love to have colleagues that also could navigate and have different experiences than I have. And, I think that's super important to create a really holistic and large dialogue. But I also think it's really important for students to be able to take a lot of classes across the curriculum and to learn a lot of tools. So, and I don't think digital's all bad at all.
How do you feel when after working with the older students, I'm talking 50, 60, 70-year-old students?
Mm-hmm.
I took a drawing class when I was probably, 50?
Uh-huh.
I really enjoyed it. My instructor was it seemed like she was a little appalled because I did a drawing of a gun, a Thompson submachine gun. And I just wondered if you had any comments on it.
I like working with older students a lot. I actually would encourage the university, if there's empty seats in a class, to allow people to take those classes for for non-degree seeking and a nominal fee. You think? Huh? And so, because they might as well. Because one of the things that my last institution, we had a lot of older students. It was more urban campus. And I loved those intergenerational relationships. And I actually teach a course now that looks at that intergenerational relationships that form. And there's something really wonderful about seeing a 19-year-old become very good friends with somebody, in their 70s. And that isn't their grandparent. It's not. They are peers in a class, and so I think that can be really exciting and really fun. I think subject matter is always a discussion conceptually. Why is somebody interested in drawing something? What is their goals? What is their intent? And those are really important conversations that we have so that people can express themselves in a way in which they can be understood, and also, aren't putting something into the world without intending that. So we have a lot of those, and help people develop concepts and ideas. So. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anita, thank you so
Thanks.
very much.
Thanks.